Welcome back to our second webinar. Every one of these webinars I like to send out to see what the people want to hear about, and what you want education on and what you want to understand. Mind you, I mean, there's a list of topics to choose from, but the idea being, we want to make these about what people are interested in, not necessarily always only what I'm interested in. So the good thing is this week, we're talking about something that I am very interested in, and it's something that is, I feel like right now more than ever, very prevalent for a lot of farmers. In a broad scope, that's micronutrients. And in this week's topic, it's specifically, we're looking at boron, right? So, hey, Terry, how's it going? Good to have you in here. With that being said, before I really jump into boron and we start talking, science and ROI and all that fun stuff, kind of want to take a second at the beginning of this to just kind of step back and talk a little bit about the broader picture of where we're at right now agriculturally, both in markets and also just on the year. Because for a lot of us, it's been kind of an odd year with weather, very, very wet, and that's going to impact some of our conversation today. Definitely impacts a lot of our decisions throughout the year. And, one thing that I've heard a lot lately is especially from corn growers, is getting calls going, hey, we put on all our nitrogen last fall, or we put on a bunch of nitrogen this spring, and we did our normal nitrogen dose, but my corn's looking really yellow. And I feel like I need more nitrogen. And in a lot of cases, when you get a bunch of rain, you're going to deal with a lot more leaching. And that is going to lead to, if you're stocking up nitrogen in the soil and you get really, really unusual heavy rainfall, that's going to negatively impact that. And then the other thing that I've actually seen a lot, and this is my caution to a lot of people, before you jump on the, hey, I'm going to spend some more money on nitrogen, which I'll talk about here in just a sec too. I've actually seen quite a bit where it was a sulfur impact, where we're seeing more impact out of things because of lack of sulfur and sulfur leaching and sulfur problems from rainfall, and not even so much nitrogen. I've even personally dealt with a couple farms where it looked like it was a nitrogen problem, but before spending all that money, it's like, let's get a tissue sample. Let's actually see, what's going on here. And it came back that nitrogen, right? But sulfur was showing really deficient. So, on years like this, when you're dealing with abnormal weather, abnormal markets, seems like everything is abnormal actually right now. It's great, to, first of all, don't panic. If your crop's not quite looking right, if it's performing slowly, if it's growing slowly, before, throwing more money on the ground, take a step back, call your local extension office, call us over here at AgriTec, and get a tissue sample, get a soil sample done, because, I tell a lot of people, it always shocks me how many people I come across that don't soil sample, and very few that even tissue sample. And to me, it's kind of like, trying to operate without ever checking your bank account. At some point, it's probably going to be something that you want to log in and take a look at what you got going on, because what you have there, if you're making decisions on assumptions, and even if they're educated assumptions, then those decisions can go from, hey, I'm really trying to help, to really just costing you money for no good reason. And so that's, one thing that this year, if you're seeing any kind of negative, growth patterns, negative effects from the weather, the climate, from heavy moisture in the soil, from cool soils, from cool air temps, from lack of sun, and you're feeling like I need to get something else on there, just take a minute. It takes us about a week to get one back through Midwest Labs. We'll send everything out to you, and get a tissue sample, get a soil sample, so you can check those things. But to get back into the markets for a second, sorry, I kind of got on a bit of a rabbit trail there. We're seeing a lot of unfavorable shifts for us farmers in pricing. With MAP prices were already high, and those are continuing to go up, and the futures on those aren't looking too great with some of the global conflicts going on. Potash, same situation. I'm hearing a lot of fear this week from farmers about urea, about UAN, and about nitrogen in general. And we are seeing a lot of pressure right now on the nitrogen market, with some states even running out in a lot of cases, and guys not being able to get nitrogen. If it's something you're dealing with, definitely reach out to us. We can help source, we can help find solutions. But, I want to let this fearful message get out there that, hey, Iran just shut down 7 of their nitrogen plants. They're a huge nitrogen producer. Ukraine just blew up a nitrogen plant in Russia. Things are about to be horrible. We don't know exactly what tomorrow will hold. What we do know is, when it comes to United States nitrogen supply, in a lot of ways, what's going to affect us the most is going to be the price of oil and gas and then availability, right? So what we're seeing right now is more a response to availability and why our prices are surging more than it is anything else. Now, we have seen oil go up a little bit recently, and that's going to impact it with countries like Iran and Ukraine and Russia. We will see some impact of that, but it's not going to be nearly the impact that places like India or Brazil are going to see from, especially because right now Brazil's in their planting season, and one of their big seasons for purchasing phosphorus, for purchasing nitrogen, and so the impact where it will be potentially felt somewhat here is much heavier in those areas. And so it's something that if you're worried about it, if you're concerned about it, or if you need nitrogen and you're looking for it and you can't find it, give us a call. We're happy to help in any way we can, even if it's just trying to find a source for you. But I always encourage people, don't panic. Let's think logically. Let's think this through. Let's talk about options. Let's talk about what the future looks like and what things actually will affect us, because it's too often where I see so many farmers, almost kind of panic buy because they're going, oh my gosh, this is going to be really bad. And we don't want to do that. That puts us in a bad spot. We want to be smart. Doesn't mean don't buy in advance. Don't plan for the future. If you're going to do it, let's make sure we do it with all the facts, with everything, accounted for, so that we're making good decisions. So to kind of actually get into our topic for today, which is boron. So boron is I'm super excited we're talking about this. I have been kind of a boron nerd over the past few months or year, and I feel like right now more than ever for farmers, focusing on things like micronutrients is something that we have to start looking at, because when you have these situations like we were just talking about, where your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, those things are getting more and more expensive. Our grain market prices, aren't responding fast enough, or in conjunction, to equate out to how much our inputs are increasing. We have to be smarter with how we farm. We have to pay attention to the details, right? And you're going to hear the gas analogy a lot in this. So just brace yourself for that. But if gas is $1.50, I'm not too worried about driving the old 1996 Ford F-150 that's getting 8 miles per gallon, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't cost $30 to fill up the tank. Big deal. But, when gas gets up $3-4, now those miles per gallon, they start to kind of hurt a little bit. I fill that tank up once, twice a week. Now it's going, oh, this hurts, right? And so what micronutrients, what these, a lot of our conversations in these webinars are about is the mile per gallon conversation. How do I get more out of what I'm using instead of using more to get what I need to achieve, right? That I feel like should always be our focus, and a huge topic of conversation amongst ourselves is going, how can we be more efficient, right? Because I can't control the price of my inputs, but I can control my inputs and what I'm putting in and how those things are functioning, and control the timing I'm using them, and control the factors that affect that. And that's why boron's such a fun conversation, and micronutrients in general, and why we should talk more about micronutrients in the future beyond boron. Things like molybdenum is a huge one that we should talk about. Zinc is another one. Those are big impacts to your miles per gallon, to your efficiency. And so, when it comes to boron, what I want to do today is kind of work through it process by process. Kind of talk about, what boron's doing in the plant, how boron, acts in the soil, and how boron impacts, yield, growth, and then really kind of close it out with the main focus, which is usually what we all want to actually know is, hey, what is the ROI impact of this? And that's what got me kind of hooked on boron. Just to give you a little teaser, is I was like, okay, I like boron quite a bit. We had a little test plot last fall with some wheat, and we intentionally, unintentionally, that's up for debate, ran a whole bunch of boron on it on this one section of this test field. And this spring we were out there like, holy cow, why is that spot look so much better than everything else? I mean, it was nuts. It was perfectly uniform. I looked like, one of those pictures you see online, perfectly uniform. It's double the height of everything else. And I was like, hey, I need to know what we did over here. Something happened to this that didn't happen to anything else. And they're like, oh yeah, we added a whole bunch of boron to that blend, and weren't sure what was going to happen. And I was like, well, I love that. We need to start focusing on that. And so it really kind of started to open my eyes, like, wait, how much is this really impacting things? And the more I started researching, the more I started learning about the impacts of boron, the more I realized that it has a massive impact. And it has a massive impact not only on yield and that beautiful crop looking the way it does and performing really, really well, but also on the efficiency of what I'm putting in, right? On those miles per gallon, of me being able to get more out of what I'm doing. And so to start at the beginning, what is boron doing inside the plant? One of the primary functions, it kind of put a synopsis on it, boron, it kind of acts like a valve in your plant's vascular system, right? It controls the flow of sugars, of calcium, of reproductive energies, right? Which are super important because if you're producing grain, that's what you're focused on, right? If you're producing hay, same thing. That plant's trying to get to a reproductive stage. That's why it's shooting up. We want to control that, right? So if the valve sticks shut, and even if there's pressure on the line, you're not going to get a lot of movement, right? So applying boron at tassel or early bloom in beans, or applying it, mid-growth stage or with your nitrogen on your hay, can have a massive impact for making sure that that valve is opening and closing, that it's controlling that movement through the plant, controlling those nutrients that we're spending so much money on to make sure that they're getting into the plant, that once they're in the plant, they're working really well, that everything's functioning really nicely. And so boron's main job, so to speak, it's kind of like glue. It's to glue together the building blocks of plant cells, right? So, you've probably heard us say at some point, or maybe heard somebody say that, everything is built on the back of calcium, and calcium is, a major component of the cell wall. Well, boron is the mortar of that cell wall, so to speak. That is also a very major component of that cell wall. And one thing you got to understand about cells is, just like I used the valve analogy, that mortar is controlling what's coming in and out. That calcium is controlling the strength. The mortar obviously is as well of that cell. But the thing that's most important is it's controlling the elasticity of that. So nutrients can move throughout the plant, can move throughout the systems of that plant more effectively, using less energy and less nutrients to get what we need, right? So what that means is, if you're dealing with stalks that are, kind of lackluster or soft, or roots that aren't pushing real well into the soil, those are typically, unbeknownst to you, a result of boron not being available. And that's early stages. We'll talk more about late stages, but one thing too, and we'll talk about soil in a minute, but just to drop a note on it, I very rarely see a soil test. Now, I do see them, but I very rarely see a soil test that is adequate or excessive on boron. The vast majority of soil tests that I come across, which is quite a few, are deficient. And so, one of those things is like, well, how much does that actually impact things, right? And that was one of the first things that got me hooked on this, is going, okay, so if I have, 0.2 ppm of boron in the soil, right? And I want to grow 250 bushel corn. Where do I need to be, and how much is that impacting me? Well, what I found out is that 0.2, or let's just call it 1 ppm, that 1 to 2 pounds that I have in the ground is about a third to half as much as I really need to have. And that small amount, that 1 to 2 pounds of addition into the plant, can have a massive, massive impact on yield. In fact, there's been studies that showed it has up to a 20 bushel yield on corn, just getting your boron right. And so I was like, holy cow, you're telling me something that costs like $10 an acre can result in $50 worth of corn? All right, you got my attention, right? And one of those things that it's impacting, aside from where it sits in the plant, how it's functioning is your sugar movement, right? So once your leaves make sugar through photosynthesis, boron is the one that helps move that sugar into the ears, into the pods, into the root systems, right? And if you know anything about toddlers, which I have one running around here somewhere, is if you give them a whole bunch of sugar, right, they run a lot faster, make a lot more noise, right? So sugar, is a fuel, just like our nitrogen, just like anything else. Those sugars that plant is producing are fuel. So we want to make sure that energy is getting to the right spot, right? We want to make sure that's going where it needs to be to push the systems along that we need to push along. So what does that mean? If you could have a green, healthy looking plant, everything looks great, right? In fact, better yet, you could have, a hay field that's performing fantastic. You could have a cornfield that's kicking butt. We're making 225 bushel. Oil, everything is awesome, right? My soybeans are over here. They're making 70 bushel. Everything's great, right? On paper, is something broken, right? And when you look at your yield data, no, everything's great. But it comes back to that same question of, but if everything stays the same and you fix one of your catalysts, right? And we'll talk about what that catalyst word means in regard to boron. If you fix one of your catalysts, could that 220 or 225 be 250? Could that 70 be 75 or 80? Could that 3 tons of hay be 4 tons of hay? And that's where you really get to the next function, and one of the most important functions of boron, which is boron is absolutely necessary for pollen. To grow a pollen tube, you need to fertilize the ovule, right? Whether it's corn, soybeans, alfalfa, it doesn't matter, right? You have to have pollination, right? So mispollination in corn is, you'll notice it quick. Your tips aren't filling out on your corn. You get tip black, right? You got this beautiful long ear, but that last little inch, 2 inches, there's nothing there. And you're like, well, it's just part of it. But we made great bushels. Well, that last little bit, could impact your yield, and is impacting your yield. And what you don't realize is you're doing everything else that you should be finishing that out, but that boron is what's keeping that from being in there. Or you're looking at your pods and you're going, man, I got these 3 bean pods, and some of these, they got a 4th, but there's no bean in it. It's just kind of empty. Or it's 3 and there's 2 full ones in there, and the 3rd one is kind of small. That's a good sign that, aside from your soil test, which is really your best sign, that, hey, you're missing opportunities here, right? And hay crops, your lower regrowth energy, that's your fastest way to tell, right? Got a guy that's using boron on hay, and he took a cutting and was wanting to run another pass of some fertilizer. I was talking to him, I think, earlier this week or late last week. And he goes, man, I cut my hay 2 days ago, and it's already looks like it's grown like 1 inch or 2 inches. I was like, well, yeah, we got your boron right. So it's bouncing back super fast, right? If you cut your hay and it feels like it just sits there for a week and nothing really happens, you should probably look into your boron levels, right? And then the next, thing that you need to understand about how boron works in the plant is calcium activation. Calcium is so important for plants, right? So important. It's so important for soil health, for nutrient availability, all kinds of functions, right? So everybody talks about, calcium and the cell wall, and we talked about that earlier. But boron and calcium have this coexisting relationship, right? And the more calcium your plant needs, the more boron it needs to go with it, right? If you're going to put more bricks in a wall, you need the mortar to go in the wall with it, right? And the more ppm, the more parts per million or pounds per acre of calcium you have in the soil, the more boron you can sustain in that soil. And also the more boron you need to sustain in that soil to have a uniform uptake, right? And then the last component I'll tell you about in the plant is nutrient and hormone signaling. So boron helps with enzyme activation, right? Which if you've ever talked to me on the phone, or probably a lot of these guys here, you probably heard us talking about enzymes, right? Enzymes are proteins that are very important for all function, whether it's you or your plant or your dog or your cow or whatever, right? Enzymes play a huge part in living organisms. And so boron helps with enzyme activation, root growth hormones, and nitrogen fixation in legumes. So if you're growing alfalfa, if you're growing soybeans, even if you haven't mixed in, right, with your grasses, boron can have a massive impact on those legumes, because it is a direct, much like molybdenum, little teaser for the future, it is a direct impact to nitrogen fixation. So if we're going, hey, we want to fixate more nitrogen to produce more bushels or more tons of alfalfa or more, tons of peanuts, right? And you don't have that boron in there, you're already driving that 1996 Ford F-150, getting low miles per gallon, going, hey, where you're going to get there, but we're going to burn a lot of gas doing it, right? And so if you have any type of legume, you've got to be paying attention to your boron. But even if you don't, even in corn growers, the impact you see, how quickly you see it, both just visually, but also most importantly on yield. And even before you get in the yield card, just looking at that ear and going, dang, that thing's full. I mean, things are working right. So kind of summarize, the plant side of this, and kind of tie in this, this nitrogen and boron assimilation, which we'll talk a little bit more as we go, is, if you think about nitrogen as the fuel, right? We're giving fuel to the plant that's fueling cell division, cell elongation. It's growth, right? It's fueling growth of that plant, processes of that plant, right? That's the gasoline shooting into that engine. And then your boron is your spark plug. It's your catalyst. That's what that word means. It's what pushes the chemical reaction over the edge. And the more catalysts you have available, the easier it is for a chemical reaction to occur, and therefore the less energy you have to use to achieve that. We talked about that a little bit in the last webinar about, energy efficiency. This is the same thing, guys. We're on the same thing of the more energy you make that plant, the less of those expensive inputs like nitrogen you have to achieve the same output, right? So if you're operating in the mindset, the old mindset of, 1 unit nitrogen equals 1 bushel of corn, well, that's a very closed mindset when it comes to miles per gallon, because obviously, everybody, if they haven't done it themselves, knows somebody that's been able to produce, much better than that in terms of bushels of corn to units of nitrogen ratio. And one of the biggest ways you impact that is increase that efficiency, increase that miles per gallon, get more out of that engine, right? So you got the same amount of gas going in the tank, right? We're still putting on our 200 units of nitrogen, our 200 pounds of urea, or whatever it is we're using. But now that's going a lot further for us. It's doing much more for the plant. And now you get 2 options here, which is great to have options in an industry in which we feel like we have very few, of going, hey, do I want to produce more? Do I want to, have to not invest as much and just get the same production without spending so much money? And that's one of those things right now where if you're looking at going, hey, I've got to cut some of these input costs down, man. I can't afford this. Then you've got to be looking at, well, what allows me to get what I need to get on the weigh cart, right? Out of the combine, out of the hay baler, but use less to do it. With boron, I want to talk a little bit about how it behaves in the soil. I feel like that's always important. And I talked earlier, I alluded to the fact that I very rarely see a soil that has excess boron. And so I want to talk a little bit about why that is. So boron is very mobile, very, very mobile in the soil. Unlike, nutrients like phosphorus, which we talked about in the last webinar about how it doesn't like to move at all, right? It's very immobile. Boron, it moves and it moves fast, right? Especially in light soils. So if you've got lighter soils, sandier soils, low organic matter, if you've got irrigated fields under pivot, if you're getting a lot of rainfall, then you're going to see a lot of boron movement. And that means it's going to leach faster. It's going to get out of the ground a lot faster, right? And so, if you're looking at that, then you also have to, take into account that, more often than not, your soil's probably not going to have sufficient boron. That's more normal than anything, okay? But then you also have to look at, okay, when do I need to put this on to get what I need to get out of it? If I'm trying to affect, my alfalfa, if I'm trying to affect my soybeans, if I'm trying to affect my corn, when do I need to put that out there? We'll talk a little bit more about timing of application based off of what type of boron you're using later on, but you got to get that in there as close to when the plant needs it, because you want that plant to take it in quickly, but you also can't rely on the soil to hold it very well. And that's why that matters so much about, the soil type. Now on the flip side, if you've got really heavy soil, a lot of clay, you're going to have, typically a higher holding capacity in general of all things, right? So a slower leaching potential. But unfortunately for the boron topic, if you're on heavy clay or really high pH ground, boron isn't leaching, but it's getting locked up, right? It's still there. You're just not using it, and that's the battle of boron, so to speak. So what does that mean? Boron binds to things like calcium, iron, aluminum in those higher pH soils. So even though it's in your soil, it's not in your soil in a way that crop's going to be able to use it. And a lot of times your soil tests will reflect that. If something is elemental, you're going to see that on your soil test. If it's not, and it's part of soil structure, right, and it would have to go through mineralization to be able to be used, then you're not going to see it. It's in there, but you're not using it, right? And then sometimes, you can have situations where it's showing up on your soil test. That's why those tissue samples are so important, because you're checking, is it getting into the plant, whether that's boron or anything else? Is that just because I have it here, is it going where it needs to go? Is it getting where it needs to be? So if you have really high pH ground, if you have really light ground, which tends to be more acidic, kind of at both ends of the spectrum, unfortunately, it's something you've always got to be monitoring is that boron. And then moisture is a huge impact as well, right? So a lot of people overlook how boron moves through water, right? So boron has to have moisture to move. It's mobile, but it still needs that moisture. And it needs that moisture in order to be pulled up in a plant, just like anything else, right? Plants absorb their nutrients, so they have to have the moisture available to absorb it. And if you have really, really humid conditions, right, you're going to be taking up less moisture out of the soil, and therefore using less nutrients out of that soil, including boron, right? Something that a lot of people don't take into account is going, well, soil's plenty moist, but it's also, I live in the South or in Missouri and it's 90% humidity today. Well, that's impacting the uptake of moisture from the soil as well. And so there's a lot with any of these. I try to keep it, as simple as I can, but there's so many different factors that can impact things. And really, we just need a cheat sheet on all of it, right? So it's kind of synopsis, the soil type plus weather risk score, right? So we'll go in order of how high of a risk boron loss is. So sandy soils, very high. Low organic matter soils, high. Not crazy, but still high. Higher pH soils is moderately high. It's not quite as bad as the sandy soils and low organic matter. Heavy clay soils, moderate, right? We're holding it, but we got to pay attention to, are we getting it, right? Irrigated fields, it's going to be high, right? We're using a lot more water. And then drought conditions, it's moderate. We want to make sure that the drought conditions aren't impacting nutrient uptake too much. That goes for things like potassium too, especially late season. If it gets real dry in August, we want to make sure that that plant's still able to absorb the nutrients it needs during that time, which two of your biggest ones, potassium and boron, right? They have a huge impact on that later season for you grain guys out there. And that comes down to just osmosis. You can't undo the fact that you got to have moisture to get things in. And if you don't, you got to find another way to get in, right? You've got to go in through different doors, so to speak, and look at things like foliar feeding. And so, I want to talk a little bit about the, kind of correlation of how do I know how much boron to hold in the ground. Really good rule of thumb, 1 to 2 pounds, right, is decent. If we can get up to, 5-6 pounds in the ground, that's kind of on the high side, right? We want somewhere right in the middle, right around that 3 pounds. But what I will say is a lot of farmers I've talked to, a lot of things I've read, you have to be careful with anything. I'm not using too much, boron being one of those, because you don't want to increase growth rate, cell elongation so much that you end up with weak stalks, weak grass, where things are laying over. And that was always a fear with boron. Well, I've seen a more and more that upper limit is we've got a lot more room there than we thought we did, and a lot more positive benefit to get out of it in that space than we knew before. But with that being said, you can easily look at your soil and say, okay, 5,000 parts per million of calcium, then I should have about 1 ppm of boron, right? Or 2 pounds. So that's a good, easy gauge to look at your soil test and go, okay, 2,500 ppm, I need to have 2.5 ppm boron, right? 5 pounds. And then adjust accordingly to go, hey, am I on target based off of what I'm trying to do here? And that's one of your kind of cheat sheet ways to go, okay, where am I at, and how much do I need? And like I've said before, when you're looking at your soil tests, that's your best starting point, right? You've got to have a starting point. That's it, right? But you've got to be monitoring those things, taking tissue samples, checking late season during, right before harvest, whether that be, on your peanuts, whether that be on your beans, whether that be on your corn, whatever that is, to say, hey, am I seeing things that are indicating a boron problem, like corn not filling out, like pods not having beans in every space. And so, you want your soil test has always got to be your starting point, but a soil test is like taking a picture of the weather outside. And then when somebody says, hey, Nate, there's no windows in this studio, what's the weather like outside? And I go, oh, well, I got a picture right here. Check it out, right? And then they go, well, yeah, but that was yesterday. It's raining. I'm like, well, my point there being your soil test is a snapshot in time of what that soil was like the day you pulled it out of the ground, right? It's necessary to have. We've got to have that. But you've got to remember, it doesn't necessarily mean what I'm seeing today is going to be reflected on that soil test. So it goes for everything, not just boron. So let's talk a little bit about application strategy, types of boron, right? I kind of want to start with types of boron, but we're going to talk about how to apply it, when to apply it, whether you're growing hay, whether you're growing alfalfa, whether you're growing grains. And so let's talk about how to apply it, what kind of boron actually, works and what doesn't. Because unfortunately, I've tried to use some boron sources like pure boric acid, where everything suggests it should work fine, but then applying it's a pain. Trying to get it to dissolve if I'm trying to spray it is nuts, and then trying to get to dissolve where the plant's actually going to take it in is just as hard. Meaning, just because I'm putting it out there doesn't mean I'm necessarily using it. And so I don't want to be spending money and time and effort, to put boron down and then go, oh, the boron didn't work. And it's like, well, yeah, because I used the straight, solid boric acid and never actually made it into the plant. I can see that on the tissue sample of that hay, that it never got in there. And so, with boron, you've got different kind of options when it comes to, what am I using here? So straight boric acid, right? Technical grade. That's your cheapest that you're going to get. It's going to keep the cost low, but very inefficient, very hard for the plant to use. I haven't personally had great experience with it. Then you've got, things like borax, solubor, powdered borons that you can mix with water and be able to emulsify. A little bit easier, to use, a little bit easier for the plant. Solubility on solubor is really high, so it makes it way easier to use in foliar feeding, which is one of the primary ways we want to put this on. But solubor, because of the form of the boron that you're getting, or borax even, is really, really you've got a lot more harsh risk of overdose, right? If you overdo it and over apply it, you can see negative effects there because of the other things that you're getting along with it. Personally, my favorite and the reason why we only carry one form here is Boron MEA. So Boron MEA is already in a liquid state, which is really nice. There's some caveats to it. You do have some foaming risk because it is technically classified as a surfactant. But because it's surfactant, it makes it really, really great for foliar feeding, great for putting, around planting time where it's going to be available and easy for those young roots to take it in. Very low risk of burn or overdose on plant tissue. And so, you're going to be getting less of a percent analysis, so to speak, out of an MEA, but every ppm, every pound of boron in that solution can be the most available of any boron form. I skipped over culminite as a boron source because you shouldn't use that. It would just drive you nuts. You'd hate it. So don't do that. But yeah, if you're looking at boron, the best ways to get your boron is if you're getting a seed coating, if you're putting, doing grain and you have boron in your seed, that's awesome, right? It's getting there right there early, helping to establish that young plant. But then a boron MEA, liquid boron, is going to be your easiest thing to work with, your best thing to use, especially because, we need to talk about timing of when do I put this stuff on, right? Throughout the growth of that plant, you want that boron to be available, right? So we kind of want to treat boron in a similar way to how we treat sulfur, and that we're kind of a little bit all along if we can. One, because the soil's not holding it too well. You can, heavier soils, you can build up your ppm. It's much more efficient to treat as, hey, where I'm going to create a protocol where every time I'm coming across that field, I'm putting a little bit out there just to make things, especially, every time I'm running nitrogen, especially for all the hay guys, all the corn guys. If I'm running nitrogen, I'm running a little bit of boron with it. I mean, why wouldn't I? It's getting me more out of that nitrogen. I want more efficiency out of my nitrogen. I'm going to put it with the nitrogen. It makes sense, and it's the right time to use it as well. So it's great. And then, if you're running late season on any kind of grains where you're foliar feeding, top dress and side dressing, putting on fungicide real late, those are your best times. The closer you get to tassel and you can keep making sure that boron is available, the more impact that's going to have when you get in the grain cart and go across the scale and go, okay, heck yeah, there, I'm seeing some boron now, So really, when it comes down to it, it's one of those where it's not like, hey, you got to get it on early. Hey, you got to get it on late. Hey, this is your window. Boron is one of those where it ramps up just like a lot of things. But you kind of have to do the same with your application. I'm going to use a little bit up front, but then, when I'm coming back and running, my post on my herbicide or running a fungicide or doing side dress, now I'm putting on a little more. Right now I'm putting like on a boron MEA. Now I'm putting on half a gallon or a gallon. Really getting that in there. Really really pushing that. With your hay production, it's one of those where if you're fertilizing in between every cutting, you'd be running the boron with in between every cutting, because we're not trying to get that to carry over from one cutting to the next. Just like, we're not trying to get all your nitrogen to carry over from one cutting to the next. And if you're going, hey, I run, triple 19, triple 17, whatever I run, right? I run all my NPK at the start of the year, and then I cut off of that the rest of the year. One of the best things you could do is go, okay, if I want to give myself a little boost after a cutting, it's not just boron, really. It's a micronutrient pack out there. It's going to be your biggest thing to wake that grass back up, get that back growing, get that next, cutting up and going as fast as you can. Because one, faster you get it up and going, right, the faster we're going to cut the next one, the more cuttings we can get. But we're also taking advantage of what we have right now. And what we have right now could be for, better conditions, cooler temps, wetter soil, whatever it may be. We want to take advantage of that as much as we can, as fast as we can. And so we want to get that plant back going. And we know boron and other micronutrients and enzymes are your fastest way to do that. So if you're going, okay, I got all my fertilizer on early, but I want to really, give it a little boost. I get that question a bunch. Hey, I just want to give it a little boost. What do I do to give it a little boost? That's your best thing. Get in there, give it a little boost of micronutrients, enzymes, some sugars, some things like that to really wake that back up. If you want any data, with regard to studies and with regard to yield impact, field studies, university studies, or just, farmers out there that we're talking to, stop after this or anytime. Be happy to shoot that out to you. We'll build a little synopsis of this conversation today with a focus on that to send out to people. And so, one thing that I want to kind of come back around to is that boron analogy. Talk a little bit about ROI. I got 15 minutes. I still want to do some questions and hear back from you guys. By the way, questions don't have to be about boron. You ask me whatever you're working on today, looking at today. But with that being said, here's what I want to jump into. It's the ROI analysis. I always feel like it's important if we're going to talk about the impact of something on the science side, on the yield side, we got to tie that back to the dollars and cents, right? Because if it doesn't make dollars, it don't make sense, right? So boron, one multi-state study, a soybean study, they were only using 0.25 pounds of actual boron per acre during R1, which is perfect time to put it on. And they were seeing a response of about 3 bushel to 5.8 bushel per acre. Okay, so I want to put that into perspective for you. We're talking about less than $5 of boron. Today's market price having $30 impact at least. Okay, so $25 ROI on beans. A forage study that was studying forage and hay. They were studying, the impacts of boron as well. They applied, I don't remember how many states that was across. I'm sorry. Like I said, I'll send all that out. They applied about half a pound of actual boron per acre to the first cutting. And on the low boron fields, they were seeing hay regrowth increase of 0.3 to 0.5 tons per acre, which once again, out of $10 of boron, an extra half a bale per acre ain't bad ROI if you're asking me. I mean, we're talking about, $50 worth of hay for $10, $12 an acre of boron going out. I love high ROI stuff. So anytime I come across something, I'm like, dang, this is where the money's hiding. That's when I get hooked on it. So bottom line ROI, you won't always see, a 10-to-1 return. Telling you studies that, we're across multiple farms. We're trying to go off of averages. Dylan hid my energy drink earlier from me. I just found it. There's no boron in there, sadly. Have to be paying attention to is, those impacts on growth, those impacts on production, but most importantly, making the decision preemptively of what is my soil type, what do my soil tests say, what do my tissue samples say? Because boron isn't one of those where you're going to look at the crop and go, oh, look at that. I can tell right now, 2 weeks into the season, now I need to get some boron this year. It's not that obvious, okay? The engine's going to run. If an engine has a misfire, if you're running with a flat tire, it's pretty easy to go, hey, bud, you got a flat tire. pH is low. You need to get some calcium in there. hey, you put any nitrogen on, right? Those are obvious. Boron is one of those where you see a car driving down the highway, you can't look at it and go, oh, I can tell exactly what miles per gallon it's getting, right? You tell that when you get to the pump, unless you got that little button on your dash, right? Or when you get to where you're going, you look, hey, man, I've ran out of gas real fast, right? And so that's the thing to drill back down on, that is, looking at the ROI impact of it. It's a preemptive thing, right? You've got to be paying attention to these things ahead of time so that we can make educated decisions that are going to positively impact our pocketbook at the end of the year. If we're not getting smarter every day and every year and every season and every cutting on how we're doing it, how we're managing our inputs, and how we're getting the most out of every penny that goes into that piece of ground, into that bale of hay, into that bushel of corn or beans, or into that ton of peanuts or silage, you name it. If we're not paying attention to those things, if we're not checking our bank account, if we're not checking our miles per gallon, then it's just going to get harder and harder for us. And so these are the things, I love this day. I'm going to open it up now because we got about 10 minutes and I have plenty of time for questions. If you got questions about boron, about using it, about when to put it out, how to mix it, how to apply it, great. Throw those in the chat right now. If you got questions about other stuff, your soil, the weather, anything but politics, I'm just kidding. Throw them in the chat, start running through things. So, Dale, you said flood irrigation in northern Nevada on conventional alfalfa. Best way to apply. I should finish reading your question. I got so excited to answer it. A liquid form would be easy to apply directly in the ditch while irrigating. It's sandy loam type, which was what I was about to say. You're in some sandy ground. Gallons per acre and cost per acre. Okay, so typically in Nevada, conventional alfalfa under pivot or under irrigation, which, I grew up a long time on the west slope of Colorado where we had a lot of irrigation that is very similar to yours, right? Where it's running in the ditch. The best way to apply it is and this comes down, once again, it's hard to tell you the best way to apply because I don't know exactly what equipment you have. But best way to apply that is try to get that on the foliage. The easiest way to apply it would be to get it in the ditch while irrigating so that it soaks into the ground, gets directly to those roots. But once again, with it being really leachable, the more we can get that onto the plant or up out of that ditch a little bit so that water, that moisture is pushing up into, out of that ditch and soaking that soil and then soaking it into the root system, it's going to be a lot better, right? As far as, gallons per acre and cost per acre, it's best to treat a crop like alfalfa. In my opinion, it's best to treat it on a per cutting basis. We're going, hey, I'm going to get in here and I'm going to run a quart or a half a gallon per cutting, right? Where every cutting I'm getting a little bit out there. So I'm constantly feeding it and I'm not relying on the soil with a big application where I'm losing it more and more over the year. A quart to the acre, you're looking about $5-6 an acre cost. Half a gallon to the acre, about $10-12 to the acre. And why I give you that range is because, when it comes to anything, whether it's you're getting it from us or somebody else, you're going to be dealing with, bulk pricing variables of, if you're getting more, you're going to get a little better price per gallon and so on and so forth. But with boron, there's not a ton of variability. So that gives you a really good idea of, okay, hey, I'm looking at extra $5 to $10 a cutting, right? And here's the impact that can have on my alfalfa out here in Nevada. And if you're doing, alfalfa in Nevada with how y'all soils are and how much leaching and drainage that you deal with, the perfect case of, hey, I got to pay attention to this. And you got to pay attention to that molybdenum too, by the way. We'll talk about that in the future. But in the meantime, definitely worth looking into because that will have a huge impact on your operation as well. Hopefully that answered that question sufficiently. I'm going to move on over here to Craig said, our soil tests typically show 0.5 to 1 ppm per acre, so about 1 pound to 2 pounds per acre. This year, I had tissue tests done on multiple farms of both corn and soybeans. Corn was reporting 4 to 8 ppm, with tissue test companies suggesting it should run between 4 to 25 ppm. That's quite the range that they gave you. Soybeans were running 34 to 44 parts per million on their tissue tests, and the company was suggesting they should be between 22 and 55. Any thoughts on why soybeans were naturally running higher than corn? I'm going to give you the most likely reason. that you're seeing soybeans running higher is because of the calcium uptake, right? So we have a higher calcium uptake in the beans, and they're taking up an equal part, right? Even if it's 1 to 100, right, or 1 to 1,000, but they're trying to take up equal parts of boron to calcium. Then a plant like soybeans that love calcium and they take in a lot of it are going to need and be affected by boron, and therefore take in more boron because of that factor, right? And not only that, but to circle back to the legume conversation, boron is a much higher impact. It's a big impact on all crops, but the biggest impact it has is on legumes, because I'm guessing just based on the time of year, you took those tissue samples here recently, and those beans are pretty young and they're forming nodules. They need that boron right now, a whole bunch, to form those nodules. They need, that molybdenum for the same reason, to form those nodules to fixate nitrogen. So they're trying to suck in anything they can get out of the ground. Where you're going to see a different kind of reaction is later in the year. If you take that tissue sample later in the year and you're looking at the corn when it's coming into tassel, and then you're going to see a lot bigger increase there, because its reproductive programming is kicking in the most then, whereas beans are kind of prepping now, right? And then they have their reproductive phase at R1, but they're really prepping for it because they fixate their own nitrogen. They're doing a lot of the work to kind of prep for that reproduction. Elasticity is the foundation of cell health and hydraulics. Amen to that, John. Thanks for the reminder. You can compare it to your own body. Loss of cell elasticity is the precursor to liver fibrosis, coronary artery disease, peripheral vascular disease, brain disease. He said, I may have missed it, but can the boron be added with other products from AgriTec? Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the beautiful things about boron is it mixes quite well with most things. It does have some risk of foam. So if you're going to do heavy agitation, put that in after you do your heavy agitation on your other things you're applying. But it mixes really well with a lot of stuff. In fact, like I was saying, it acts as like a surfactant in many ways. And so applying it with other things can be super beneficial there as well. If you want a specific, hey, I'm mixing this and this and this and boron, reach out, shoot a text over to somebody here. We'll very quickly tell you, hey, here's your mixing order. Here's this, if yes, it can mix, right? And then how to do it to be most effective with it. But yeah, that's one of the nice things about a lot of your micronutrients in general, mix really, really well. And 100%, I totally agree with you, John. Elasticity is 100% the foundation of cell health. My own elasticity is getting worse and worse every day. It seems like I'm not very flexible anymore, but keeping those cells flexible and elastic means nutrients are moving right. Things are flowing right. We're getting well. Richard said, what is the best time to put boron on soybeans? I'm in Southwest Florida. So I'm gonna tell you the answer based on bean stages. I could tell you based on where you're living, with where you're at. Once again, it kind of comes back to, if I was to answer that effectively, I would say the best 2 times to put it on would be early. I think Craig might actually been responding to this, and I very much agree with him. Put it on early, V3. If you're hitting a late pass, close to R1 or a real late stage, hitting another dose of it then is great, because you're really close to that reproductive stage and have a really, really good effect then as well. So if you had to pick one, right, try to do mid-growth stage or your last pass, because a lot of times that's mid-growth stage. But if you're having a late stage pass as well, adding a little bit or splitting that application over those is going to be awesome. Terry Love says, all my soil samples have 0.1 ppm. What is the amount of boron needed? Clay-based soil. So missing a bit of data to really answer that effectively, right? But what I will tell you is 0.1 is definitely on the deficient side, right? And if it's clay-based soils, I'm going to assume that you have a CEC of 10 to 15. And that's an assumption. But if it is 10 to 15, that means you're probably in the 1,500 to 2,000, 2,500, calcium range. So we go back to our cheat sheet, would tell us that, hey, I need 1.5 to 2.5 ppm, which would be about 3 pounds to 5 pounds of boron. And where you're sitting right now is very, very little, almost not reading on your chart. So any boron applied right now would have a fantastic impact on you there, Terry, because that clay, it's got it in there. There's boron in that clay, but it's being bound really heavily with clay particles and cations. And so getting those up will make a big difference. Have you ever used, this is Jason, he said, have you ever used sap testing for nutritional values? So I did quite a bit of work in the cannabis industry, and that was when I got introduced probably the heaviest to sap testing, to tissue sampling. And I found it to be way more accurate, way more beneficial. And if you can do both and you can get sap testing and tissue sampling, the thing you got to understand too, and this is why we like Midwest Labs quite a bit. They're not paying me to say this. I just like them because they do a really good job with their extraction methods, right? And so one of the tough things about tissue sampling is like every lab is going to have slightly different extraction methods, and that's going to impact quite a bit what you're seeing and the accuracy of what you're seeing. And that's why like tissue sampling, you know, you're going to get great insight, but you have to kind of take some of that into account. Sap analysis, you have less variable of extraction method and technique, make it a little bit more uniform and reliable when I'm looking at sap analysis to understand exactly what's going on in the plant, or deficiencies, excess, whatever, versus a tissue sample. John said, what about adding it to 28 when side dressing? Like, man, that's what I would do. If you're side dressing corn, if you're doing your spring pass of nitrogen on your wheat, that's like the perfect time to get it in there. You're getting a little surfactant with it that'll kind of help that nitrogen perform better. But most importantly, I'm giving the spark with the gas, right? I've got the full system where it needs to be, and that side dress is the perfect time to get that in there. And you know, it's right in line with what we were talking about running it in that mid stage of growth, that B5, B6 on corn. That's the perfect time. I love running it with 28 and putting those out together. Man, these questions have been awesome. You guys are asking some really, really great stuff. We are running out of time, and so I hate to wrap it up because I could just sit here and hang out all day, but I do have to close this thing out. If you had a question you didn't get to jump in, or for some reason I missed your question, shoot a text over, shoot an email over, shoot a message on our website, whatever, you know, whatever's easiest for you. We're here to help. We're here to answer questions. We're here to explore ideas. You know, it doesn't even have to be a question. You know, if it's like, hey, I've tried this, I've done that, man, I want to hear your feedback too. If you're already using boron, call me. I want to hear how it's working for you. I want to hear how you're using it, when you're applying it, what you've seen out of it, because the more we educate each other, the more we will build ourselves up as an industry and continue to gain traction instead of feel like we're constantly losing it. So like I said, let's keep the conversation open. We're always here to talk, hang out, chat, whatever it may be. We'll send out another questionnaire for the next webinar of what we want to talk about. If you have suggestions too, we'll put a little box on there of like, man, I'd really like to hear about this, or I'd like this to be a suggested topic at some point that people could choose from, you know, especially if as we get these go on, if you're like, man, my topic's never getting chosen, you know, reach out to us, man. We love talking about what you want to hear about. I want to sit here and talk about things that are actually going to help, and also things that you find interesting and find useful. So anyway, to everybody that was in here today, thank you so much for taking some time out of your Wednesday, finally getting some sun, getting some hot weather. Hopefully things are growing really well. Dylan wants me to make sure I tell you guys, you know, follow us on social media. We'll be posting this as well. So if you didn't get to catch the whole thing, if you know somebody that you're like, man, you know, I wish that, you know, Billy would have been in here today to hear all this, we record these, so we'll be sending it out. We'll have it on our YouTube channel. You can go on there and watch it back. You can critique me, leave comments about the way I look. You know, this guy picking his nose. No, just kidding. So, you know, definitely, you know, we love to interact with everybody. So join in on that. We'll publish this in the next few days, and then probably be another week or two, and we'll do another one of these. And before that, send out a questionnaire. Richard said, have Wyatt talk about peanuts. Honestly, I 100% think Wyatt should get on here and talk about peanuts. We should definitely do a peanut specific webinar at some point. I think there's so much cool stuff to talk about with peanuts. And if you don't grow peanuts, it doesn't mean don't jump on there, because a lot of stuff that applies to peanuts applies to soybeans and applies to alfalfa. So jump in on that one too. Wyatt's a great guy. Hates being in front of the camera, so we're going to have to force him to do it. So if he's sitting up here with his hands behind his back, it's just because he's handcuffed, it's just fine. Anyway, appreciate all you guys. Hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time. If you missed one of these webinars, or if you haven't been to one yet and you want to tune into the next one live to ask questions and to participate, follow us on social media or get on our website and click the, stay informed, stay in touch, keep the contact button on there and sign up for that. And we will send out updates about when the next ones are. We'll also send out emails asking you what you want to hear about, what you want to talk about, so that we can keep running these, keep learning, keep growing, and keep getting better together.